Hello, friends. This is Doug Schaible, and welcome to the Premature Bible Institute. Trust you've had a good week and everything's been good. It's been good doing these lessons. I've really enjoyed getting back in to them and just thinking about what it tells me about the Lord, about how great and wonderful He really is. And we've been going through a lot of days of creation already. We talked about God in eternity past, the creation of the spirit world. We've talked about the creation of light and air, dry land, vegetation, even the sun, moon, and the stars. And today we're going to start talking about the animal kingdom, at least parts of that anyway. Not every single thing, that we're going to leave out one thing today, but then we're going to talk about the rest. So just talking about that, about the things that we've learned so far. All of those things that God did show us something about Himself. They tell us who He is, what He is like. But He's revealing Himself in such a way that He's not boring. He reveals His greatness and majesty. The fact that He existed before everything else reveals something about God. It tells us that He is self-existent, has no need of anything else. It also tells us that by nature He is eternal, because if there was nothing there, nothing could have made something else. So something had to make everything except one thing, the one who was there to begin with, and that is God. And since God could not have created Himself, then by nature He is eternal, and everything else isn't. And so that just tells us things about Himself. But all of the things that we're learning about, in the last lesson we talked about the creation of the dry land and all of the vegetation, the plant kingdom, and so on. And that reveals something there, that all of those things, up to this point, none of the things that were created needed anything else in order to exist. Angels didn't need to any of the physical world in order to exist. Light didn't need anything else to exist. Air didn't need anything else to exist. The dry land, none of that. So all of these things are there. Water didn't need anything to exist. So all of these things are there, and they can exist by themselves. God had to create them, but they didn't depend on anything to exist. But on the last part of day 3, we see the vegetation coming in, the plant kingdom, and all of that needs the other things in order to exist, and it needs all of the other things to exist. So God was showing us that He is a God of laws and order, and He is an orderly God. He does things decently and in order. And then all of those things were there. Then we see Him creating the sun, the moon, the stars to give signs and seasons. It tells us about what time of the year it is, what's going on. It tells us for navigation among the seas and celestial navigation, all of these different things. So those are pretty interesting things, I think, in and of themselves. But today we're going to start talking about some other things that God decided that He was going to create. And we'll just start with reading Genesis chapter 1, verses 20 through 23. And it says this, "And God said, Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God's creating all of the fish, all of the sea life, and He's also creating all of the fowl and birds and so on. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So it's really interesting how these different kinds of animals create those kind of animals. The whales create whales. They don't create sharks, and sharks don't create barracuda, and barracuda don't create walleye or anything like that. Each according to its own kind. And in the same way with all the birds that fly in the air and all those animals, they create. Ducks don't create eagles. Eagles don't create sparrows. Sparrows don't create cardinals, and so on and so forth. So those are things that God created in order to do and to make more of their own kind. And He wanted them to multiply. And it says right here, doesn't it, in verse 22, and God saw that. Let's go with 21 at the end of it. It says, and God saw that it was good. So the things that He created, He says it was good. Why? Because He's good. God cannot act in a way that is inconsistent with his nature and character. So a good God creates good things. An evil God would create evil things. It couldn't create anything else. So God is good, and God created good things. And then it says this in 22, and God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. So all of these animals are starting to come into existence, and God's command to them was, be fruitful and multiply and fill the sky and the waters with your own kind. So that means all kinds of sea life were there, whales, killer whales, dolphins, flying fish, stingray, barracuda, lobster, manatees, cuttlefish, octopus, and he created them with every color in the rainbow you can imagine. We lived on an island over there in the South Pacific in New Guinea. And boy, I tell you, we would go snorkeling off of our island. We're right along the reef where we were at. And you name it, every color in the rainbow was there by those fish. You just couldn't believe it. It was just, you never got tired of it. It was just beautiful what you had to see. And so God did all of that. He created all of those. Every color in the rainbow that you can possibly imagine, you could see down there, the blues and the reds and the yellows and oranges and whatever, They was just, and they were the kinds of colors that that no artist could paint. Only God can make something look that good. That's just the way he is. So he created all those sea life, and he also created all of the birds that there are, all the cockatoos and parrots and lorikeets and fruit bats and birds of paradise and crown victorias. I didn't know until I got to New Guinea that a Crown Victoria, which is what a Ford used to make a car called a Crown Victoria, I didn't know that was actually a bird till I got over there and saw a Crown Victoria. But eagles and cardinals and ducks and you name it, every kind of, like I say, cardinals and sparrows and pigeons and turtle doves and whatever, a prairie chicken, all the different birds that are out there, God created them. And he created them to blend into their habitats, but at the same time, they could fill and live within the habitat that he put them in. So each one had its own distinctive sounds, its own distinctive colors, and its own distinctive habitat that it was kind of more in. Now, with, say, like the killer whale, it could be anywhere. We used to see them in New Guinea, where the water's is warm, the warmest water in the world, and you could see them up at almost at the North Pole there and see stuff up there, or at least up in the North Atlantic and the North Pacific there, you could see them. So they kind of habitated anywhere. Whales will too. So their habitat is the ocean. That's what it is. It's not in fresh water, but it's in salt water. And on the land, you get to see all the different fish what guys go out hunting and fishing for and so on. So, but what did God create first? Before he created the birds and the fish, he created water. He created air. Even if you're underwater, fish need oxygen. He created light. He created oxygen, and he created vegetation. So all the sea life needed vegetation. All the bird life also needed vegetation also to survive and eat and so on. So, and it was just interesting to know how God prepared all of that first before he brought them into existence. Because just like the plants needed the dry land, the air, the light, and the water and everything to exist, so all the animals needed all those things created before it in order to exist also. They couldn't eat air. The birds and the fish, they couldn't eat air. They couldn't eat light. They couldn't eat water, or they couldn't eat the ground. I mean, those things were there, and they all needed to exist in order for all of those animals to survive, to eat. But they had to work together. They had to fit together in a form so that they could produce something that was edible for all the animals, whether fish or birds. So they needed vegetations to exist. God doesn't just make things beautiful and awe-inspiring. When you look up and you think, wow, you see the giant redwoods and the sequoias out there and big trees out there in Northern California, or you see the Grand Canyon, all those things. He made them practical. He made them to have function. So none of those things were created just for the sake of creating them. God didn't need any of them in order to be satisfied. God was satisfied just as he was. But he did that for us. And he did that for, well, he had it for a purpose. And we'll see what that is here before too long. So he made the animals to be able to exist in their environment. So the birds could, they had air. That's how they survived. And so they had lungs that they could breathe air. The fish had water where they survived. And they had gills in order to extract the oxygen from the water. Fish have gills, birds have lungs. They both have oxygen in order to exist. God gave fish water to swim in. He gave the animals land to walk on. And God made bees to pollinate, to make all the... That's amazing. He even has now, he's having not just all the stuff there just for the animals and the land animals and the birds, but now he's using them, and now they're all working together to produce something. Even the bees are pollinating plants such as corn and stuff, so it would reproduce itself. All of it working together, and God is an orderly God, and he does things decently and in order that way. So everything was there, and it needed that. Now, like I said before, God made nothing for his own benefit. He just doesn't need it. But it doesn't mean he doesn't enjoy it. It just means that there was no point in making it for his own pleasure, in the sense of that he needed it to be happy or to be satisfied. He was content and satisfied just as he was. So it was meant, all of creation was meant to benefit something else. And we're going to learn what that is. But just think about that. For God, he existed for eternity without it and was content. Never lonely, never suffered any need. So then why did he create? That's what we're going to be learning. So air was meant for breathing. It was meant for cooling the sun's rays. It was meant for birds to fly in. And it was meant to spread seeds, such as, like pollen gets spread. So did God need any of those? Of course not. So what was water for? Water for swimming, for drinking, and for cooling the earth. Did God need that? Of course not. But he did it anyway. And like I said, just because he does something doesn't mean it doesn't have purpose. Even if you don't see it at that particular point, there is purpose in it, and that purpose comes out in time. So plants are for food and for beauty. Once again, not for his benefit, but for something else. So God created color. He created textures. He created flavors. He created sounds. And he created aromas. And everything God created was good, because he's good. So day 6. Now we've covered the first 5 days of creation. So on day 6, it becomes a big day. It's not the only day that he created, but we're going to talk about the first part of day 6 right now. We'll talk about the latter part of day 6 starting next week. But today it says in Genesis 1 verses 24 and 25, it says this: "And God said, Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." So now God is creating all of the land animals. We're not talking about the birds, not talking about the fish. Now we're talking about land animals such as cattle and bison and deer and cats and dogs and whatever, any type of land animal that there is. He's creating the armadillo and the duck-billed platypus or whatever. He's creating those now on day 6. He says, livestock and beasts of the earth according to their kind. And he says, and it was so. So when God said it, it happened. Why? Because his nature and his character go along with that. His omnipotence, his goodness, his perfection, all goes into all of that. So, and it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So once again, we see God doing something in a way that reflects who he is, his goodness. And he's doing all this for a good reason. So he created all the livestock, and he made it so that the livestock would reproduce according to its kind. Dogs with dogs, cats with cats, bison with bison. So they would produce, a buffalo would produce buffalo, a cow would produce cattle, the horse would produce horses, the armadillo would not be producing cats, and so on and so forth. All of these things God made so they would reproduce after their own kind. So God's creation ideas are endless. They have no limit to them. But he did limit how much he created, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. So there's all different varieties within each one of those species. So in the birds and fish and plants and planetary objects, in light, there's visible, there's invisible light. There was a man back in the 1600s, his name was William Law. And William Law wrote a book one time, I cannot remember the name of it, but I remember a particular thing that he talked about light. He says, light is invisible. And I'm sitting there thinking, what? I said, light is invisible? He says, yes. He says, light is invisible. Light can only be seen at its source and upon the object upon which it reflects. In other words, in between the source and an object, light is invisible. And I never thought about it that way. I thought, well, that's why space is dark, apart from the sources of light. You see the sources. Why do we see the moon? Because the sun reflects off the moon. Why do we see everything that we see? Because light reflects off of it. But we don't see the light in between the two, unless there's something in between, like a haze or whatever, but that's even reflecting off the haze. So light is invisible. And God made all these different varieties. Birds don't produce land animals. They don't produce fish. They don't produce plants. They don't produce planetary objects, and they don't produce light. These are things that are within themselves. And so God created all of those things and made them so they would reproduce like themselves. Everything reproduces according to its kinds. Like I said, cats don't bear dogs, elephants don't bear kangaroo, and birds don't bear duck-billed platypi. I don't even know if that's the right way of saying the plural of platypus. So anyway, it's kind of funny. But man cannot create. Only God can. Because to be able to create means that you can make something from nothing. And everything that man produces comes from something else. It doesn't have to be an original idea from someone else, but it does have to come from something else that has been already created. So man, whatever God creates is good and perfect, and therefore does not need improvement. Everything man creates, if you want to put it that way, or produces, needs improvement. It always does. It's trial and error. It's the way things go. Something has to be done to make it better. No one produces something and then makes the next model to be worse. That's self-defeating, and it's not very profitable to do something like that if you believe in that type of system. So all of what we can see up to this point shows us a God who is orderly, perfect, all-knowing, all-powerful, everywhere, at the same time, in time, and, everything. He's everywhere. So God is this self-existent person who inhabits everything. He inhabits the universe. He inhabits time. By inhabiting, I don't mean that he's in people in the sense that he controls us or whatever. What I'm saying is that God, there isn't anywhere God isn't. He is the creator of all that exists except himself. He didn't create himself. He always was. He is an eternal person. So everything we've talked about up to this point has been building to the very next lesson. So all of what we've been talking about up to this point is now getting ready for the very next lesson. And next week, we're going to start to reveal God's ultimate purpose for creating everything. Once again, remember, God didn't have to do any of this. He's never had to do any of it. But we will start to realize why God created atoms, galaxies, light, air, dry land, vegetation, sun, moon, stars, birds, fish, and land animals. Why he did all of that. We're going to start learning on that next week, and I think you're going to enjoy it a lot. So that being said, I just want to say thanks again for this lesson. Now just remember, think about what God has done up to this point, and think how much you've learned about him just knowing that a self-existent, self-satisfied God who is completely content and satisfied just as he was, decided to create. And remember, I'll talk about that another subject later on, but it'll be an interesting thing I think we want to talk about God deciding to do these things and why he did it. So anyway, Like I said, if you have some friends who want to listen to this, please have them contact or get on my blog site, which is tribalschaible.com, or go to their favorite podcast and look up Premature Bible Institute, and they'll find me, and have them subscribe, or get on YouTube if you want to watch the video version of this, and just go on my name, Doug Schaible. My last name is Schaible, and of course my first name is Doug. Just look that up and they'll find my podcast or my video podcast, and just go ahead and have them subscribe to that. That way, when I get a new one up, which I do every week, it'll let them know. You all take care. Have a good night, and thanks for listening. Bye.